It's funny how events in the news can spark memories previously buried deep beneath the all-consuming day-to-day concerns of life and living in this hopelessly polarised 21st century. It was one such news item recently which rekindled my interest in an issue which I have long thought to be unjust and to be a metaphor for the inequalities and unfairness which is so pervasive in our part of the world today. I will relate to you the memory in question, an event from decades ago, and from it you will, I'm sure, be able to deduce the news item which sparked its otherwise unlikely recollection. A bit of reverse engineering, if you like. I was a young constable in my first 2 years of service in Bradford, when on a day shift in around 1984 I was directed to attend the Bradford Bridewell. The Bridewell was a central dedicated custody area with around 30 to 40 cells, located in Western Area headquarters at the Tyrrells, the building from which I also worked. Now, normally I would only find myself at the Bridewell for the purposes of lodging some miscreant or other I'd arrested, or to deal with a prisoner handed over from the outgoing shift. Often a person arrested by the night shift for drunkenness would not have sobered up sufficiently to be charged and bailed before the night shift retired from duty, and thus it fell to the early shift to carry out these responsibilities. On this occasion, however, I was called upon to meet up with a warrant officer for the purposes of an escort. The warrant office was a centralised department then consisting of a mixture of police officers and civilians. Their purpose was to investigate and, where successful, execute warrants of arrest, usually issued by magistrates' courts in respect of people who had failed to attend court in response to being charged and bailed or summoned. An aside here, there are 3 ways in which a person can be compelled to attend a magistrate's court. After an arrest, they can either be charged and bailed to attend court on a particular date, or in serious cases, charged and detained to appear before the next sitting of the court. The third way is by means of a summons, which is issued to people reported for relatively minor offences which have not necessitated their arrest. Even the most serious offences, though, such as murder, will always involve a first appearance before the magistrates, who will then commit the person for trial in the Crown Court. So warrants are issued when bailed or reported persons don't show up at court, and they carry a power of arrest. Only the police officers serving in the warrant office could make these arrests. The civilians had no such powers. On this occasion, I assume because of a lack of staffing, no police warrant officer was available, and at the Bridewell I was to meet a civilian member of staff whom I would accompany to a local address for the purposes of executing the warrant and making the arrest. The civvy would do the paperwork. Easy job. We soon arrived at a typical working class house in a typical working class area of Bradford. Working class, but well maintained and otherwise very ordinary. Certainly not the usual ghetto of offenders which I'd anticipated. I inquired of my colleague as to the nature of the offence for which the warrant had been issued. I was not expecting the response to be watching TV without a licence. You're kidding, right? No, she was reported for the offence by the TV licence people. Summons and failed to attend court. She, I thought. This could get complicated if there were kids involved. As it was, it would appear that the kids were at school. However, I could still foresee problems because I knew what the ensuing process would be. The lady in question, by now visibly in shock, was to be taken under arrest to the Bradford Bridewell, where after processing she would be taken before the magistrate's court, where in all likelihood a fine for the heinous TV licence offence would be imposed. And if she couldn't pay, a custodial sentence of up to 6 months would be imposed there and then. I fervently hoped that she would be able to convince the court that she could pay. That was to prove a forlorn hope. We took our charge to the Bridewell, where the usual checks confirmed what I already suspected. She was of good character. Her only crime, and it was and still is a crime, was to be a skint single mother who dared to watch TV with her kids, no doubt as a distraction from the privations and misery of her circumstances, but to have done so with an expired TV licence. Then, having been well and truly fizzed by the TV licensing bullies, she failed, for what could have been any number of reasons, to respond to the summons. This was not what I had joined the police to do. If I'd thought that that was the end of my involvement in this sorry matter, I'd have been very much mistaken. Not many hours later, I was returned to the Bridewell, and to my disgust, there is no other word, I was required to escort the same unfortunate lady to Newhall Women's Prison to serve a 3 weeks custodial sentence because she couldn't afford to pay the fine. By now, this poor woman was distraught. In all likelihood, the kids would be committed into local authority care for the period of her absence if other family members were unable to step in. I remember thinking that I'd rather pay the fine for her myself than to take her to a hellhole where she had no business spending 3 minutes, let alone 3 weeks. Of course, there was no provision for doing this, and when I protested this injustice to colleagues, I was told in no uncertain terms that this was simply justice taking its course. Bullshit. This was nothing more than the triumph of bureaucracy over humanity. Having left the poor woman in the charge of the prison staff and making my way back to Bradford, I remember feeling a sense of being tarnished, unclean, unworthy, sullied. I was supposed to uphold justice, not injustice. But of course, it was just because the law said as much. And that was the end of the matter. It was not the first time I would feel ashamed of a day's work in the uniform of Her Majesty's Constabulary. So, could this happen today? Well, as far as the law is concerned, there's no reason why not. TV licensing law, unlike parking law, has not been decriminalised. The Communications Act of 2003 applies, and watching a TV without a licence is a criminal offence under that Act. Any court process involves the Magistrates' Court, not the County Court. Enforcement and prosecution is contracted out by the BBC to a private company called Capita. Cash all round for the boys again, eh? I've always held a TV licence, even though I rarely watched the BBC. Many years ago, there was a knock on the door from some jumped up little bell end who just alighted from a detector van and wanted to carry out a routine speculative inspection of my TV licence, as he'd detected I was watching TV. No shit, Sherlock, it's shining out through the lounge window there. There was something said about having the right or power to demand that I produce the licence for inspection, and he produced some sort of ID card. I returned the compliment by producing my own police warrant card and inviting him to promptly vacate my property because he would likely otherwise do so whilst wearing a German Shepherd. I never heard another word about it. Of course, I'm all in favour of an objective and impartial national and international news provider, one not hog-tied to either the very partial interests of oligarch-owned media giants, nor to those of nation-states which happen to be flavour of the month with the government of the day. Maybe one day we'll have such a thing. What this particular incident from my past now recalled does for me is that it serves to remind that deeds normally regarded as unconscionable in a country like ours can actually come to pass through a combination of bad regulation and institutional cowardice. To my mind, somebody gifted with the power to do so back then in 1984 should have decreed that nobody should ever find themselves incarcerated for not having a TV licence. Such a notion is obscene. That there was a complete lack of backbone to do so speaks volumes of the state of affairs both then and now. Looking back now with less vested interests in the operation of the law, I can see that the particular injustice visited upon that poor woman could have been averted at a number of tactical levels, in spite of the strategic operation of policy and procedure. The Warrant Office could have put the matter firmly on the back burner and left it there. After all, they had more than enough in the real world of recalcitrant offenders to keep them occupied. The magistrates could have granted extended bail to allow her to pay through small instalments the outstanding licence fee. It was also in their gift to waive any and all penalties relating to her failing to respond to the summons, but instead they chose the easy option of following procedure. Hope for a quiet life, eh? All of which inevitably brings us full circle to me. You might say that on principle I should have extracted myself from the whole process once I'd realised what was going on. I could have done so overtly by refusing to carry out those duties, or covertly by feigning the sudden onset of illness or some family event requiring my urgent attention. The first option would have immediately resulted in a formal disciplinary process, with the very real prospect of dismissal and the end of what was a promising career. The second option would, at the very least, have raised some senior eyebrows and transferred me from the has good potential list to the keep an eye on him list. Either way, the outcome would have been exactly the same, and the events I have described would have unfolded at the hands of someone else. There is a much used and often misused quote: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." The attribution of these words to Edmund Burke has been widely called into question, though not, so far as I can see, credited to anybody else. No matter that, because to my mind it stands as a gold standard aphorism which perfectly adumbrates the seemingly endless examples of institutionally meted out injustices now populating our social landscape. Whether it's the infected blood scandal, the post office scandal, the 2020 procurement of PPE scandal, the waspy women scandal, or any of the numerous examples of wrongful convictions, the common thread of good people sitting on their hands can be found weaving its way through the tapestry of events only later told. That quote may well be misattributed, but it is sure as hell true. Thank you once again so much for listening to me ramble on. Can I please ask you that if you enjoy my content and you are not already subscribed, that you consider doing so. It makes a massive difference for me and enables me to keep the channel going. So with that, I'll wish you safe riding and see you on the next one. I'll see you.